Okay, so we have in front of us something very interesting. We have two packs of paper. One is the text we're going to learning, and the other is a supplement text, which has all the sources necessary to understand what's happening. So this is a Torah Rabbah. Torah Rabbah. We're looking at the text at the papers that have like the logo on the top first. So I put the date there, and you can see I wrote Makodes to Torah Rabbah. This is sources for the Torah Rabbah. Torah Rabbah means like the big announcement. It's like a PSA, public service announcement, written by the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, Rebbe Shalom, regarding listening to the Torah as one should by law. So I put the sources where this PSA, where this Torah Rabbah has been published. It's various different sources. Now, the first text there, the box there with like the picture, the image of the text there, that is the way it appears in the Igros Kodesh. It is the book of letters from the Rebbe Rashab. There's the following. There's the following intro, the following header to this announcement. It reads like this. First, it tells you where you can find this letter. Now, Lefneza, before that sham over there in the texts he cited, by Yair Nativ, there comes in Yair Nativ means like lighting the way. Hanetak that was transcribed, Miguf Ksaviat Kodesh Admor Mayras Nishmas Edem. So the announcement we're going to be reading is from the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad. Now, the way it's originally published, it has like an entry from the previous Rebbe, that is the son of the Rebbe Rashab, who writes regarding this announcement, gives us the context of the announcement. Clear? So the previous Rebbe is writing an intro to his father's announcement as it's being published in these books. So it reads like this: Torah Rabbah, the great announcement, the PSA, Al Oidos Shmias Kriyas Torah Kedina, with regard to listening to Torah properly, listening to the reading of the Torah properly. Ksav Yad Kodesh, written by the holy handwriting of my dear father, the Rebbe, may his memory be a blessing, and so on and so forth. All the proper accolades for a Rebbe. And then it says, Yair Nativ, light the way of the path. Maimer Hazeh, this essay, Kosvu Haitzchak Amor, Harav HaKadosh, my holy father wrote, Yom Hei, on Thursday, Beis L'Chodesh Sivan, on the second day of Sivan, Tov Reish Nun Vav, 5656, which is 1896. So he wrote it on Thursday, the second day of Sivan. Now, B'Yom Aleph, on the following Sunday, which is Erev Shavuos, which is Erev Shavuos now, it's the 5th of Sivan, Sunday. Tikoi Reish Shin Chaf. It was transcribed by Reish Shin Chaf. In the parentheses they put, you have Shmuel Kaisef, Shmuel the writer. Rosh Hamatikim, the lead copyist, the Lubavitch in Lubavitch, B'meshech Shanim Rabbis for many years. Being a copyist in Lubavitch, or in Chabad circles in general, was a very big deal. A copyist meant you have a very quick and neat handwriting. Now, what that meant was, so let's say you came to Lubavitch for Shabbos. You came for Yom Tov. And the Rebbe said a Maimer, and then after the Yom Tov, the Rebbe would then write down the Maimer as he said it and hand it over to the copyists. The copyists would make a copy. And then, if you were there in town, you might pay the copyist to spend a few dollars and copy it for you so you can take it home. And you would add it to what's called your bichel. Bichel meant your booklet. So you had like a folder with all your ksavim, with all your copy of the Maimarim that you collected over the years. And you collect over some time. It was like your personal library, your bichel of Chassidus. So today, the Maimarim that we publish today are, the Rebbe's library in New York has tens, hundreds of these bichelach, these booklets that Chassidim had carried with them throughout Russia as they collected their copy of Maimarim, and they've been published. So sometimes you'll compare one copyist, another copyist, and see if there's a word change, and they'll figure out what's the more correct one and whatnot. So this Shmuel was the lead copyist in Lubavitch many years, and he got a salary from the Rebbe's from the Rebbe's funds, from Lubavitch Central. He was paid to be the local copyist. This was his job to be the copyist. So just parenthetically, recently, the Rebbe's library, the staff of the Rebbe's library, open sourced all their manuscripts. They're one of the most forward-thinking libraries that exist, certainly in the Torah world. They copy and publish everything they have. They ever wanted it to be a public library, they're making it a public library using the internet. So thousands of books they've uploaded online, both old and new, pictures, and they just recently announced that they published, they scanned and uploaded Jewish magazines dating back 300, 400 years. So you can search and find old magazines from all times and places. And they recently published, scanned and copied every page of their manuscripts. So you could find bichlach that belong to people that you might know. And I found from my great-grandparents, their handwriting, their bichlach, the things. I found from my wife's great-great-grandfather, Chaim Ben Zion Raskin, famous patriarch of the Raskin family. He has a big stack of them, and on top it has his name, This bichel, this booklet belongs to Chaim Ben Zion Raskin, his handwriting. And my father's great-grandfather and his father, or great-great-grandfather and his father, were abanim in Russia, published numbers for them that's still used today, and I found the manuscripts for them. So it's just very, very just parenthetically.
Where are we sworn now?
They're all in the library in New York.
In New York.
Yeah, you can go visit them. All the bichlach, yeah. So you can now you can view it all. Go to chabadlibrary.org or something like that. When it first came out, I was having just a ball going. Go there, have a look. Manuscript number 1 is the Baal Shem Tov Siddur. Scan page of page, another Shem Tov Siddur, and you can find in there names of people that Baal Shem Tov would have davened for. And you can see, like we found the Shbal Zeta's name in there, Shavani Polar's name, not Shavani, but you find names. So and so, son of so and so for so and so, son of so and so for whatever.
This Siddur retrieve online?
Yes, it's online, open source. They just, I didn't spend enough time with the magazines yet, but there's old newspapers. Most of these newspapers are like one big paper that would have been posted in the town square or something like that, or like in the shul. Sorry, going back for a few hundred years. Yeah, have a look. Chabadlibrary.org, and you'll see it has manuscripts, magazines, books, and pictures, and you can scroll and search by all categories and languages and things. Fascinating thing.
I read yesterday that Lubavitch is suing, London is suing the Russian government.
That's been going on for years already. That's been going on for years already. Yeah, it's been going on for years. Yeah, it's been going on for years. The Rebbe began that process because there's many more than there are in the library in New York. There is in the Kremlin. Yeah.
They said you give us the books and we'll give you something.
It's just this is a battle going on for years. There has been waging battle for this for years. Okay, sidetracked. Sorry, for years. Anyway, not for now. There's a lot of history behind that. It's been going for decades already. Okay. So this essay, this publication, this PSA that the Rebbe Rashab writes was written on Thursday, and then on second day of Sivan, and then Sunday on Erev Shavuos, it was copied by the lead copyist, Rabbi Shmuel Kosev, Shmuel the writer. They had biku, and it was attached as some Rabbi, this great announcement, this PSA, Halazu, the Kosev Beis Medrash was hung on the walls of the local shul. So ahead of Shavuos time, I guess the crowds are coming, people are catching up. So there's a big poster with a write-up from the Rebbe Rashab at the time, the Rebbe at the time, announcing that people should keep quiet during Torah reading. So clearly it was a problem in Lubavitch in those days too. So ahead of Shavuos, the Rebbe Rashab had this announced. Hamayda Asarashim Gadol, says the previous Rebbe. The previous Rebbe writes, this announcement made a great impression. Erev Shavuos, the Yom Hardishim the Persuma, on Erev Shavuos, that very same day, the first day of its publication, right? It was written on Thursday and published on Sunday, Erev Shavuos. Nasakama Asiris Hatokos, many tens of copies have been made by these copyists that we're talking about. Bishvila Orchim, for the various guests, Shabo al Yom Tov Lubavitch, who came to spend Yom Tov in Lubavitch, in the town of Lubavitch, where the Rebbe's court is held. The Yom HaSheni, the Chag HaShavuos, on the second day of Shavuos. The Su'uda, during the meal, Omar HaChassid, Reb Reish Gimel Daled, as I say in the parentheses, Reb Gershon Doi Paharer, famous Gershon Doi Paharer, famous big Chassid, was a big Rav, and he was one of the people who was actually invited to sit at the Rebbe's table for the meal. So at the meal, he tells my Holy Father, the Rebbe Rashab, quote, this is what Reb Gershon Dov Paharer tells the Rebbe. The Chassidim are thankful to the Rebbe for having inspired them to listen to the Torah reading properly. So they're thankful for the Rebbe for the inspiration. My father, my holy father, the Rebbe, responded. This is the previous Rebbe writing. Giving thanks when you're talking about something that is meant to inspire action, who apoyal mamish is the action. So the real thanks for my publication will be when they actually implement my announcement, meaning when they're quiet during Torah reading, I'll know they're thankful for my inspiration. Right? So anytime you're thanking me for inspiration, the real thanks is when you're actually going to implement the inspiration. So you want to appreciate what my announcement? Good. Let's see everybody keep quiet and show. Rebbe Rashab continued. The matter is clear. One who listens to the Torah reading, as the law requires, in addition to the fact, he fulfills the mitzvah of God, even without the mitzvah element of it. Just the very fact, the honor that he accords the Torah, through this, the Torah itself awakens mercy upon him, on his members of his household, spiritually and physically. So besides the mitzvah, just the very fact that you're giving the respect to the Torah while it's out, that you're listening attentively, that itself, the Torah itself, advocates on your behalf for you, for your family, spiritually, materially. So we're putting a sign up? End quote from the Rebbe Rashab. I knew that question was coming there. Someone's going to put up a sign. I knew the question was coming. But this sign was written this sign was published in 1896. Since then, it was never announced. Did the Rebbe Rashab Madah?
No, just also Ladava.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Doesn't
that's there. Not this whole full announcement.
Really obey on God now. You have ammunition now.
Okay, ready? Here comes more ammunition. Sorry? Yeah. Okay. Some background before we get to the Rebbe Rashab announcement, which we're going to look at in a minute. Let's continue and let's look at the Gemara, the sources, the background behind this. This is the Gemara in Soita Lamatesa Mud Aleph. Yeah, I think I saw that already. The Gemara, that's not an endorsed logo.
Not at all.
Not an endorsed logo.
Well, put this out. I have a friend of mine, and Orsameach has it. It's identical to only the Orsameach logo.
Yeah, sorry. The logo presentation wasn't endorsed. That's just okay. So for background to understand the announcement that the Rebbe Rashab published. Background is as follows. The Gemara in Sotah says like this. We'll look at the English, make it easier. Rava bar Rav Huna says, once on the second page, just background to what the Rebbe Rashab is going to discuss. The Gemara says in Sotah 39a, Rava bar Rav Huna says, once a Torah scroll has been opened, it is prohibited to converse even about matters of halacha. As it is stated, and Ezra opened the book in the sight of the people, for he was above all the people, he was standing on a podium. And when he opened it, all the people stood up. And standing is referring to nothing other than silence, not just standing and talking, but standing at attention, giving focus, meaning being quiet. As it is stated, here's a proof that standing implies silence. Quote from the book of Eov, and shall I wait because they do not speak, because they stand still and answer no more. Implying that they do not speak is the same, because they're not speaking because they stand still. So standing still is implied. If the implied there is the silence. And Rav Zera said that Rav Chizda said that prohibition against conversing is derived from here, as opposed to the verse in Ezra, a different verse in Nehemiah, and all the ears of the people were attentive to the book of the law. Book of the law is Sefer HaTorah. Torah means law. They were not listening to any other voice. End quote from the Gemara in Sotah. So here you have the Gemara. It says straight out, one may not speak from when the Torah is opened. Yeah? Well, Ezra was actually there's two takanas we have for Torah reading, one from Moshe and one from Ezra. Okay. So, excuse me.
But isn't there a principle that we don't derive halachas from nothing?
The Gemara derives it.
I know. Yeah, but so the question always comes up: how is it possible?
Usually, asmachta, whatever you want to say it is. Doesn't matter. The point is, the Gemara here states that it's forbidden to talk when the Torah is open. But now we have, even in matters of halacha, the Gemara said, right? And the Gemara brings no dissenting opinion. Now we have the Gemara in Brachas, Daf Chesed Amud Aleph on 8a, says the Gemara in Brachas. The Gemara relates that Rav Sheshes would turn his face away from the Torah while it was being read, and he would study. He's turning his face away, learning while the Torah is being read. So explaining this practice, he said, we are engaged in ours, meaning I'm engaged in my own learning, which is the study of the oral Torah, and they, the community, are engaged in theirs, listening to the words of the written Torah. So no disrespect. You're learning that part of Torah, listening to the Torah being read, and I'm learning my own part of Torah. Yeah. Since Rav Sheshet was engaged in Torah study, he's not considered one who forsakes the Lord. End quote. So what's going on here? Hold on a second. We're not done yet. Yeah, so there's a contradiction in the Gemara. Before you get to the halacha, there's a contradiction in the Gemara. One Gemara unequivocally says one may not speak when the Torah is open, even Torah reading. And here Rav Sheshet says he turns his face away and learning and saying no problem. You're learning Torah, I'm learning Torah, it's all good. Seems funny. So he says, Taisvis right there in Saita, not the Gemara Brachas, which I just quoted, but the first Gemara says Taisvis. Kivin sheniftach sefer Torah asla sapra afilu b'divrei halach. He quotes the Gemara in Saita, the Gemara which says, as soon as the Torah is open, one may not speak, even in matters of halacha. Makshinon, we ask, mipera kama de brachas. We can ask a question from the Gemara in the first tractate of brachas, which we just read. The Amar Rav Sheshes, where the Amar, which says, the Gemara says, that Rav Sheshes have mahader ape, Rav Sheshes would turn his face away, the goddess, and learn. Amar and Rav Sheshes explained, inu b'didayu, we are learning our Gemara, our Torah. I'm learning this part of Torah. Va'anan b'didan. Sorry, they are learning their part of Torah, the written Torah, and I'm learning my part of Torah, the oral Torah. So this is a contradiction. How can Rav Sheshes be learning while Torah is being read? What? So maybe he fulfilled his obligation somewhere else. Let's say he fulfilled his obligation somewhere else. But here we're talking about the honor of the Torah. The Gemara, right? The Gemara doesn't say. The Gemara in Sotah doesn't say. It's like this. When you have to fulfill your obligation for Torah learning, for Torah reading, of course you can't. You can't be talking. You have to be hearing the Torah reading. Here it's saying even if you fulfill your obligation, right? You can't talk out of respect for the Torah. And here, Rav Sheshes is learning. Yeah.
It's funny, like so, when you have to go out of the room, you take it off.
That's right. Yeah.
You just turn your face around.
Oh, so let's see. So Matzino Lamemar says, so Taisus gives a number of different resolutions to the contradiction that Rav Sheshes is learning while the Torah is being read. So Matzino Lamemar, we found it to answer, to Mahadar Ape Shaini, turning his face away is different. Answer one, like you said, turning his face away. That's why he was allowed to. So he wasn't disrespecting the Torah, he was turning his face away. Answer one. Inami, or you can suggest another answer. Rav Sheshes Shaini. Rav Sheshes was a unique character, and he was allowed to be learning while Torah is being read. Why? Mishum davar ma'oire nayim. He was blind.
He was what?
Blind. He's blind. And he was exempt from Torah reading. Mishum davar dvarim shebiksav, because the halacha is matters of written text, that is to say, the written Torah. You're not allowed to say it by heart. It's a din. You're not allowed to say a full pasuk in Torah by heart. There's certain Talmid Chachamim which they would misquote the pasuk on purpose, because you're not supposed to quote a pasuk by heart.
You can't say version of all.
Sorry?
You can't say version of all the you find that's hard.
I'm not saying how you practice it and what you do, but this is what it says. So, sorry? Yeah. Yeah. Look, most of us say Sukkim Bal Peh. But it's a din in the Gemara that Dvarim Shebiksav, things that Hashem intended that are written in text, the written text of the Torah, should not be said by heart. So because he's blind, and so the written text is closed to him because he can't read and he knows it by heart, so he's exempt. The kiva and the potter bekriya, because he's exempt from reading the Torah, afilu b'shas hashmiya. Therefore, even as he's listening, he was allowed to listen. He was allowed to be involved in other Torah learning because he anyway wasn't exempt. He wasn't obligated in that Torah learning. Answer 2 from Tosfos. Behind the Amar, and this would explain what Rav Sheshes meant when he said, "Anam b'didan." I am involved in my Torah study because I can't be part of that Torah study.
Why is he punching from listening?
Because he's cut from the reading. This is what the halacha is to read it, but shemeya ka'oina. The halacha is you have to read it. But
okay.
Let me finish. The halacha is you have to read it, but shemeya ka'oina. One who hears is as if he's saying what the person is saying. So the mitzvah is not the listening to the Torah reading, like shofar, where the mitzvah is to listen to the shofar. The mitzvah of the Torah reading is the Torah reading, but we fulfill Torah reading, but via his reading or via listening to his reading, we're fulfilling his reading. But the point is the mitzvah is not the listening, the mitzvah is the reading. When it comes to shofar, you don't say al tkiyas shofar in the bracha. You say al shmoya kol shofar, to listen to the shofar. Right? So even the guy blowing the shofar, his mitzvah is not in his mouth, it's in his ears.
But for the sibber,
1 second. Sorry?
The sibber has to
right, but here's the point. Because the essential mitzvah is the reading, not the listening, and he's exempt from reading, for there's no mitzvah to listen either. Because the listening is only an extension of the reading, and he's exempt from the reading. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes, but I don't know why he's punching from the listening.
That's the answer. Because the listening is only an extension of the reading. When I listen to the guy reading the Torah, it's as if I'm reading it. Right?
You can't read it. So.
Exactly. So it's shemeya ka'oina. When I say amen to a bracha, it's as if I said the bracha. So someone who's exempt from bracha is exempt from amen. Same logic. Yeah. When it comes to shofar blowing, the mitzvah is not the blowing. The mitzvah is the listening to begin with. Right? It's not as if, let's put it this way. When the Chassidim blows the shofar, I listen to it. Did he do the mitzvah on my behalf? No, I did the mitzvah. Exactly, because I listened. But the Torah reading, the reader is doing it on my behalf via my listening.
So he should be.
Well, my listening is the way in which he reads on my behalf, but it's the reading that's being done. Right? And because he's exempt from the reading, he's exempt from the listening. That's just his argument here.
But the bottom line is, if he can't read, he can't see, and he could hear, he should be listening to Kriyas Torah.
So Tosha says he's exempt. He's exempt. So therefore he's
exempt because you can't read, but if you can hear it.
So if it's saying there's no mitzvah to
hear. The guy who reads, it's like.
But it's all right because again, when I listen, which obligation am I fulfilling? Listening to Torah reading?
Because you can only listen. You can.
But what's the mitzvah in fulfilling when I listen to Torah reading?
When you listen, it's like him reading it.
It's like I'm reading it.
But you yourself, all right.
When I listen, it's like so the mitzvah I'm fulfilling here is not the listening to the reading. I'm fulfilling the mitzvah of reading the Torah by someone else. And he's exempt from reading.
Yeah, but if he's able to hear it, it could be like he's listening.
But he's exempt from it. He's exempt from that activity. Okay, we're arguing. Let's just go back there. This is what Tosha says. Anyway.
Look for a way out to.
Good question.
No.
You can ask the question of Tosha. It's not arguing about the Tosha. We're asking the question. And it's a good question. But before we ask the question, let's understand the halachic principle that Tosha is laying down here. The halachic principle is the exemption of it. Yossi suggesting, even if you're exempt, you should still try. Good, fine. But you're still exempt.
How does it exempt everyone else who's learning?
Who?
You aren't all blind.
Who?
He's learning. He's
on his own. He's learning. He's learning on his own.
Learning on his own.
He's reading on his own.
I thought he had a
No, he's learning on his own. He's learning on his own.
Self-self,
yeah. So now we understand what he means when he says, Anan bididan. I am involved in my learning. Because that reading that's happening, I'm exempt from. Going to favorite halacha, like matters of halacha, which are dvarim dal peh. They are of the oral tradition. The inu b'didayu, but they are learning their Torah, dvarim shebiksav, things that are written text. Because I'm not part of that learning, so I'm doing my own learning here. You know what, Yossi? To make the point in more, I would say like this: if he's exempt from Torah reading, yeah, so he's no obligation not to be listening, but he has the mitzvah of Torah learning. So the learning he's doing is a greater mitzvah than the listening. Because the learning he's doing on his own, he's actually obligated to do.
You should learn with the clothes, learn not your own.
Okay, that's already your sentiment. But the halacha of it, he's actually fulfilling a mitzvah. He has to learn the oral tradition. Whereas what he's listening to wouldn't be a mitzvah he has. I'm just making an argument the other way.
If our listening on Monday, Thursday, for example, only with the road button,
it's not none of biblical. And his learning is biblical. Yeah, good point. There you go. His learning would have been biblical commandment to learn Torah. Whereas he would have downgraded by listening to a Torah reading that he's exempt from. Maybe.
First of all, don't be
rephrase. Yossi, just rephrase.
You should be more to listen to the.
Yossi, just rephrase. Just rephrase that. Rephrase that. I don't understand the Tosfos yet.
Okay, I
that's it. That's okay. Yeah. Okay, let's go back there because I don't want to make more time on this. Let's get into this. Absolutely not. For sure not. Okay, well, we can talk about it once you still know. Okay, Miyu, however, Mistabra, it would. So these are different answers that Tosfos offers. However, Tosfos himself doesn't like any of these answers. It's like Tosfos is he himself doesn't like any of these answers. Miyu, however, Mistabra, it seems more correct, says Tosfos. Kipirish ben Chananel, the way the Ben Chananel explained it. The Pirish ben Chananel explained, Hassam over there. Rav Sheshes is learning during Torah reading. Dafka Rav Sheshes, specifically Rav Sheshes, ukiyotze by people like him, not because he was blind. That said, Rabbi Chanan is not a good enough reason. And Tosfos says, I like Rabbi Chanan's answer. So why is Rav Sheshes special? The Torah Nasai. Torah is his occupation. The man did not spend an extra second doing anything but Torah learning. And if that person, he can be learning while the Torah is going. Avla Idna, sorry.
Like that is also from Devin.
Exactly. Someone like that, Dafka, not because he was blind, but because he's Rav Sheshes. Avlaidna. But nowadays, when no one can claim that kind of intensity of Torah learning, Kirava Svirulan, we follow like Rava in Saita, the Amar Rava, which Rava said, Kivin Niftach Sefer Torah. Once Sefer Torah is open, etc., one may not speak, even in Torah learning. Okay. Now, behind the Hav Mahad there Ape. So why did Rav Sheshes turn his face away? That's the Gemara says. The Gemara says he turned his face away. Why? Shleimar might suggest to have a orcha de milsa. Don't have orcha de milsa last but yeah, it's not an appropriate thing last halacha to be involved in to be learning halacha, but anpeit sibura with his face to the community by while they're sitting and listening to the Torah. So I think what Tosfos means here is, back in the old shuls, and some of the Ashkenazi shuls still have this, where the Rav stands in the front that faces the community. So would it be respectful for him to stand there and face the community while they're listening to the Torah reading and he's busy with the Gemara? And that's why he turned his face around. But his exemption, nothing to do with his face being turned around. His exemption is predicated on the fact that Torah Nasan. He's a Jew who not a moment went by wasn't learning. So this is the foundation of what we're about to read in the Rebbe Rashab's announcement. So let's go to the text. The actual text of the Rebbe Rashab. We're going to come back to this text when we need help with other things. Okay, Yizoru al Nafsham. You see it there? It says it was Simon Zayin. Shmiyas Kirsat Torah Kadina, listening to the Torah reading as is proper by halacha. Yizoru al Nafsham. Guard your lives. Or guard yourselves. Shalom Daber, not to speak, Lasayach, not to converse. Be'ez Kirsat Torah, to time of the Torah reading. Ukamoy Shekosed b'Shulchan Aruch. As a Shulchan Aruch writes, Hilchas Kirsat Torah, in the laws of Torah reading, Simin Kuf Ben Vav, chapter 146, Sif Beis, paragraph 2, Vizel Lashona, and here's a quote from the Shulchan Aruch. Now, I told you those two Gemaras, and the Tosfos, because we're going to see, the Shulchan Aruch is going to synthesize these Gemaras along with these answers that we saw from Tosfos. Okay, that's why I went through that background. Kivan Shehit, quote from the Shulchan Aruch now. Kivan Shehis Chalakada, look at specific Torah. As soon as the reader begins to read from the Torah, also l'saper, it's forbidden to converse, speak. Afilu b'divrei Torah, even in words of Torah. I get this. Afilu ben gavra legavra, even between one aliyah and the next. However, you can't. No,
you can't take to someone else, but if you're reading a Rashi.
1 second. It's even not that. Even if he himself already learned the whole Chumash, he already learned that parsha that week. He still may not speak even between aliyahs. But before we jump to conclusions of this, go to the other text page, and that's why I added. Go back to the other text page. You see the next text. There's Be'ed to the Shulchan Aruch. See on the second page. The second, no, on the other text, but on the second page of the other text. The English one, yeah. So the bottom there, quote from the Be'ed Hativ.
Not the English dark page.
Yeah, the one before it, the bottom of the one before it, or maybe two before it. The second page is the last paragraph says Be'ed Hativ. Okay, so top of the third page then, Be'ed Hativ. Sorry, my apologies. Top of the third page. It's Be'ed Hativ that what you're reading the top of the third page. For me, it's the bottom of the second one here. It's the Be'ed Hativ. It's a commentary on a gloss commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, which collects some other sources. Lagavra, yes. So he quotes the Shulchan Aruch, which says you may not speak between one aliyah and the next, one person and the next, and writes, Ubach Pasach, the Bach, the famous Bach, writes, rules, to ben Gavra Lagavra Mutter, that between one aliyah and the next you may speak. Ubefrat, specifically Ha'idna nowadays, Shemamrichin de Mishaberach, where there's a long pause in all the Mishaberachs between aliyahs. So he writes that one may speak between aliyahs.
How does the Shulchan Aruch pass?
The Alter Rebbe? Yeah. Good question. You want to bring the Shulchan Aruch? So I didn't even think to look it up. Aleph, Shulchan Aruch Aleph. No, down, middle. There you go, right there. Yeah, Aleph. Yeah, thank you. I should have looked this up before. I don't know why I didn't. Kufman Vav, let's see. Oh, I know why I didn't. Because you don't have that part of the Shulchan Aruch. That's part. We don't have those sections. I remember why I didn't look it up yet. Because you don't have it. Anyway, okay. So, continues the Be'ed Hativ in parentheses of Shallah Kosav. And the Shallah writes, Im also l'sapra Philip ben Gavra Lagabra. If the Shulchan Aruch paskins that you may not speak between one aliyah and the next, Afshar Sefer Sagar, even though the Torah is closed between the two people. Im Kain, if so, Ma'yanu lo Yamadina Gadol. What are people going to answer on the great judgment day, the great and awesome judgment day? Those people shemisapim b'shas kriya that speak during the actual Torah reading. Oy lahem, woe to them, and to their souls. The Zohar goes at length to talk about the negative consequences of speaking during Torah reading. So even if you're not, in other words, even if you're going to, I think what the Be'ed Hativ is trying to do is like this. Even if you're going to pass like the Bach and say you're allowed to talk between aliyahs because there's a lot of time going on, especially nowadays, there's mamish lots of time happening. And to say you can't talk, okay, the Torah is closed, it's covered. But during Torah, if the Shulchan Aruch is going so far, even if you're not passing that way, if the Shulchan Aruch is going so far as to say that you can't speak even between aliyahs, woe to the one who speaks during the actual Torah reading itself. That's kind of what the Be'ed Hativ is trying to tell us. Okay, back to the Shulchan Aruch, yeah? Back to the other text. So we're back now to the Rebbe Rashab, the other text there, the Hebrew text. Yeah? Back to the Hebrew text, where the Rebbe Rashab is quoting the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch ruled that one may not speak when the Torah is out, from when the reader begins reading until the reader is done reading, even between aliyahs. That's how the Shulchan Aruch basket. That's how the Rebbe Yosef Karo ruled. By the way, as far as the Shishols that follow the Rebbe Yosef Karo, do they not speak between aliyahs? Like the Rav, what does the Rav expect of his community in such a shul which follows Rebbe Yosef? Even between aliyahs?
Well, I mean, today, yeah, no one tells you.
That's what I'm saying.
What is the man would it be?
Right, but does the Rav shush people between aliyahs or only during Torah reading? So I'm wondering.
I never heard anywhere.
That's what I'm saying. I haven't read either. That's why I'm asking.
You never hear.
Okay, I'm imagining, especially nowadays with all the Misha Berachs, and you're calling this one up, you're calling that one up, and there's you dancing with some of the mouth stuff, you're throwing candies. It's hard for me to see that someone's going to implement this in a real way.
I've been doubting.
Between aliyahs, people talking. Yeah. Okay.
In fact, it's very mindful. It's so weird. As soon as the bracha starts, they don't talk.
They're not supposed to.
Yeah. Even by the bracha. Yeah.
That's right. Correct, for sure.
They don't talk.
We're going to get to that in a little bit. So let's continue. Okay.
Standing up.
Sorry?
Standing up. You want to talk about standing up during your...
Not here, no. Actually, the Rebbe Rashab does address standing up in a different place, but not here. The same Rebbe Rashab who writes this also addresses standing up, and he seems to encourage it, but we'll talk about maybe another time.
Rebbe used to until his foot.
Yeah. Maybe we'll get that another time. Okay. Yeah. So let's continue. So he continues quoting the Shulchan Aruch. Sorry? The Shulchan Aruch continues reading. There are those that permit learning silently during Torah reading. Shulchan Aruch writes that. There are those that allow learning in an undertone. This would be following Rav Sheshes. Sorry?
Verbalizing, not just
verbalizing in an undertone. Yeah, ligros balachash, to verbalize your Torah reading in undertone. Those that permit that. This is what.
Follow the Balkari?
No. To be learning on your own, silently, like Rav Sheshes. Others say, if there are 10 people listening to the Torah anyway, so there's a minion doing the Torah reading, you can even speak in Torah learning beyond just whisper. Again, this is Rav Sheshes. These are different ways of understanding Rav Sheshes that the Shulchan Aruch is putting here, like we saw from Tosfos, different ways of understanding. There are those that are allowed. There are those that allow for someone whose occupation is Torah study, like Rav Sheshes, right? The person who's Torah study 24/7. And there are those that allow. There are those that allow that if before the Torah was opened, Machzir Panov turns his face away. Another way of understanding Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes turned his face away before Torah was opened. And in so doing indicates that he's not part of the Torah reading that's happening now. So before Torah is even opened, he turns his face away. And likros, but he reads on his own, and he begins to read even before Torah is opened. Then he's also allowed. So different ways of understanding Rav Sheshes' behavior are all incorporated into the Shulchan Aruch, without giving a clear answer as to like what we should or shouldn't do.
But no one else will ever be allowed to do that. Except for
okay, so 1 second. So hold on a second. So there's only one opinion that says it's only for someone who is Torah Nasa. The rest of them seem to be implying if you turn your face away before Torah is opened, if there's a minion listening, if you're doing it very quietly, right? That's what it seems to say. One of the answers is if the person's occupation is Torah. Rebbe Rashab will address this. Don't worry about it. But none of this, of course, gives any license to talk about the latest news. It's just all Torah learning, right? So let's begin. Ligros means to like to. Garcinon, like to learn, to read. Okay. Now, continue. Now, this is end quote from the Shulchan Aruch. Atkan l'shani, end quote from the Shulchan Aruch. Continues now the Rebbe Rashab. The Imi Yos, even though Shamachaber, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef or Beis of Cairo, lo yechriya halacha el kami, he did not conclude as to who the halacha follows. Which one of these different opinions is the permissibility? If it's undertone, is it permissibility if there's 10 people there? If there's permissibility only if you're someone who studies all day? Is it permissibility if you turn your head away before Torah starts being read? He didn't rule as to which one he goes with, right? But however, says the Rebbe Rashab, based on that which the Yad Malachi writes. The Yad Malachi is a book that outlines the rules for how you come to halacha. Rules for how you come to halacha. Called Yad Malachi. How does a Rav open up a Shulchan Aruch and know which opinion to follow, when to take leniencies, when to take stringencies, when do you know Rambam this, when do you know all kinds of things like that. Like the rules, the principles of the different books. He has principles for Shulchan Aruch, he has principles for Rambam, he has principles for all kinds of learning and halachic derivation. It's an authoritative book. So, in the book Yad Malachi, B'Kalolei Shulchan Aruch, in his outline for the principles of how you derive law from Shulchan Aruch, Oised Gimel, section 13, there Shekaisef he writes, Shekaisef b'Shulchan Aruch, that when the Shulchan Aruch writes Yesh Omrim v'Yesh Omrim, when the Shulchan Aruch has 2 Yesh Omrims, Naktinon, we follow Kisvara Shni, like the second one. Yeah. Now, skip the parentheses. The Imkain, if so, Benidin Didan, in our case, Nidadas Machaber, would seem therefore that the author of the Shulchan Aruch's opinion is the second opinion, the second Yesh Matidim, which is specifically someone who before Sefer Torah is opened, Machzir Panov turns his face away, and begins to read Kodim Shniv Sefer Torah. before Torah is open, for him is permissible. That's the opinion it would seem to be, based on the Yad Malachi's principle, that you follow the last opinion. But once the Sefer Torah is opened, it's forbidden, even for someone whose full occupation is Torah. Right? Following? Because look how the Shulchan Aruch is phrased. Go back to the first paragraph there. The Shulchan Aruch reads like this. First it says you're not allowed to talk. Yeah. Then it says there are those that permit to speak silently. Now, some say if 10 are listening, then you're allowed to speak Torah words. But that is only if opinion A, your occupation is Torah. Opinion B, you started before the Torah was open. So if we're going to opinion B, that means the permissibility to speak Torah learning when there's 10 people there is only if you started before the Torah was open. But even if your occupation happens to be Torah, you may not be learning once the Torah is open if you didn't start before. Yeah, clear? So yeah, so top of the page base. Even someone whose heart desires Torah study intensely, and he wants to review his studies. And there are anyways 10 people listening, he still may not be learning unless he turned his face away before and started learning before. Test, giving a citation.
There's only 10 people, then you can't.
That's for sure not. That's for sure not, yes. Now, Viyan.
Talking about he was Yotzer, because he's not Yotzer.
L'chora. L'chora must be Yotzer. L'chora must be Yotzer. I think so.
You heard it already.
Presumably.
Your learning is not more important than listening to the Sefer.
I guess so.
You got a duration, never a run.
When he's not born, he's a regular person. No,
Yeah, I don't know.
There's only one guy who's
I don't know.
Born.
I'm not sure. Okay. Viyan, considering the fact that because of our great misfortune, nowadays, mi'uta de mi'uta, there's a minority of minority. This is in 1896 he's saying nowadays. There's a minority of minority who misha chashke nafsi b'Torah kol kach, someone whose desire for Torah study is so intense. Meaning to say, unless you're stealing yourself away from a good lashon hara to go learn, because you mamish love learning and can't handle doing anything else, maybe we'll start thinking about you learning during Torah reading because you can't steal yourself away from learning. But unless you got to that level, don't convince yourself that, I love Torah learning, that's why I'm learning during Torah reading. You'll learn after Torah reading on your own time instead of doing whatever else you do. Yeah. So there's a minority who have that kind of deep desire for learning. And therefore, therefore, perhaps for this reason, the author of the Shulchan Aruch opens up to begin with. It's forbidden to talk even Torah study during learning. In other words, the Shulchan Aruch didn't begin by saying, some say you're allowed to talk during Torah learning, and some say you're not allowed to. He begins by saying open-ended statement, no one's allowed to. And then he goes and says, there are those that permit, those that permit, those that permit, those that permit. Right? But the first statement is not stated as a statement that has a counter opinion. It's just stated as a fact. But there are those that permit. Following? Why did he do it that way? To tell us that as a matter of fact, this is the way it is. You can't speak. It so happens there's extreme exceptions that exist. But not as if there's two opinions. Some say you're allowed to talk and some say you're not allowed to talk. Following? Okay. Yedua, and therefore it's known, says the Rebbe Rashab, anytime the Shulchan Aruch brings one view, bistam, without qualifying it, without beginning by saying, this is the view of some. He just says it as a statement. One may not speak during Torah reading, even in Torah study. And then he brings a second opinion, as a, quote, some say, his view is to follow the one that he said unequivocally. So the second opinion, which says there are some that say when there's 10 there already, there's two versions to how you might be permitted. Either because you turned your face away, or because you're someone whose Torah study is your intensity. That second clause is brought in as a some say. But the first clause, which says you may not speak during Torah reading unequivocally, is not brought in as some say. It's stated factually. The Rebbe Rashab is saying, therefore, what the Shulchan Aruch is trying to tell you is, this is my view, even though there is that exception for those that might exist in that fashion.
Only one
This is my view.
uniform.
That's right. That's right. So this is how the Shulchan Aruch lays out its halacha. First stating unequivocally, you may not speak even Torah study. Some say if you're talking quietly, you're allowed to. Okay. Second thing, some say that if there's 10 people already listening, then you have two different ways that you might be allowed to, either because your Torah study is so intense, or because you turned your face away before Torah reading started. But that whole clause is brought in as a yesh as a some say, whereas the first opinion is not brought down as some say; it's brought down as halacha, indicating that this is the Shulchan Aruch's view. This is what the Rebbe Rashab says. And skip the parentheses, befrat, and specifically, benidin did down in our case, she stumbled the Talmud b'saita daf l'matesamad aleph. The Gemara in Saita unequivocally states, as we learned it earlier, one may not speak from the Torah is open. Without saying that there are those that say a counter opinion.
Open by the pop, right?
Yeah. Continues the Rebbe Rashab. Umagam, and to add to this.
You have to do mincha.
Oh, really? Have a look at where they're holding, and we can pause and we'll continue after mincha. Audio is working here. Yeah, it is working. It will pause over here for mincha. We'll come back after. Let's pause recording and then we'll come back after mincha. Okay, so what the Rebbe Rashab is trying to do is taking us through an exercise in making us understand that while the Shulchan Aruch does cite to different opinions that allow under certain circumstances for someone to be learning during Torah reading, that's not the primary opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. And so far, what he told us is like this. The Shulchan Aruch brought two views, right? First it said, welcome back. First it said, one may not speak during Torah reading. That's the first thing the Shulchan Aruch said. And then it said, some say you're allowed to if you're saying quietly, if you're learning quietly. Then it brought another opinion. If there's 10 listening, right? If there's 10 listening, then you may be learning while there's Torah reading going on. And then he said that that's only either one of two circumstances. Either you're someone who's Torah study full time, or you're someone, or you turned away before the Torah was opened. So first of all, said the Rebbe Rashab, in the second half, the Shulchan Aruch probably follows the second opinion, which means then even someone who has this deep desire for learning, he could only be learning during Torah reading if he started before the Torah reading started. Number one. Number one. Number two, there's also a principle that when the Shulchan Aruch brings two views, and the first view he brings just as a statement, and the second view he brings as a yesh amrin, as there are those that say, as opposed to begin with saying, some say this way and some say that way. States the first one just as is. And only the second one introduced as there are those that say it's the Shulchan Aruch way of telling us that he's of the view of the first one. And here the first unequivocal statement is no talking during Torah reading, even if it's learning. Considering the fact that that's the statement of the Gemara. The Gemara in Saita does say that. Learning, one may not speak during Torah study, even during Torah reading, even if it's Torah study. That's what the Gemara in Saita said unequivocally, and the Shulchan Aruch does the same thing. Okay. Furthermore, says the Rebbe Rashab, Magam, additionally, the Fimasha cost of the Birchei Yosef, Ois Aleph, based on that which the Birchei Yosef writes, section 1, Mi Sefer Selas Blula, quoting from a book called Selas Blula, B'Shein Marin HaTzvi Ashkenazi, in the name of the great rabbi, Rabbi Tzvi Ashkenazi, Shehichzik B'Yad Avagoyin, Sheva Knesset Agdola, who cites to the opinion quoted in the Knesset Agdola. Citation of where to find the source. Main point. Shapirish, this source explains, the Hadar of Sheshis, Mahadar Ape, there is this opinion which says, in explaining Rav Sheshis' opinion, Rav Sheshis' practice of turning his face away and speaking Torah during Torah reading, this was the whole conundrum, because surely the Gemara says in one place you may not speak during Torah reading, and all of a sudden we have Rav Sheshis turning his head away and learning. So we had all these different ways of trying to resolve it. So one way of resolving it is as follows. Hainu, this is to say, he would only turn his head away to learn while the translator was translating the verse. So the way the Gemara was read back in Talmudic era was you had one person read the Torah, the person was called up. There was no chazan reading the Torah like we have a designated Torah reader. They didn't have that. Whoever got the Aliyah, that's the one who read the Torah. He would read a pasuk, he would pause, and someone next to him would read the translation. He'd read the next pasuk, he would pause, and the person next to him would read the translation in Aramaic. I was in one shul in a little town called Shiloh. Shiloh, famous Shiloh, where the temple once, where the Mishkan once stood, the tabernacle once stood. There's a Taimani shul, Yemenite shul, and they do Kriyas Torah this way. And I went to visit I was there anyway, but my host directed me to daven on Shabbos morning to get the experience of listening to Torah reading the way it was done in Talmudic era.
It's so easy to read.
Very long.
How do you even talk in Hebrew?
Aramaic. There was a designated Maturgaman. There was a designated like Gabbai. He would call people up for Aliyahs. And there's no set amount of reading you do for each Aliyah. The Gabbai decided, okay, stop here. Call the next guy up. 10 Aliyahs, 12 Aliyahs, 15 Aliyahs, whatever.
Guy who got the Aliyah
read. And next to him was the Maturgaman who read the translation. And it did it properly with the Shabbat, with a Gimel and a Jimel, properly translating, pronouncing every single letter. It was fascinating to watch. And it took a while to even follow what they were saying because the pronunciation is so different.
While he's translating, you can look at the pasuk and know how to read it. You know?
So, yeah, that's what happens. Yeah. So it's quite a long Kriyas Torah, but it's interesting. So says this opinion that when the Gemara says that Rav Sheshes would turn his face away and be learning while the Torah was being read, it means when the translator was translating, not when the Torah itself was being read. But during the Torah reading, even Rav Sheshes himself would not be learning. And he would listen to the reader reading. And therefore, therefore, this explains why when the Gemara in Saita says that the moment the Torah is open, one may not speak, the Gemara doesn't follow it by saying, oh, well, Rav Sheshet didn't, as it is a different view. The Gemara doesn't do that. Why? Even in all the answers that the Tosfos gave, and all the other answers he gave, he turned his face away before Torah was read, he's turned us in Nasa, he studied Torah all day long, all the different answers. The Gemara should have said that. Then when is it true that that you're not supposed to learn if you're an ordinary person? But if you're Rav Sheshes and you're blind, you're allowed to. Or if you're Rav Sheshes and you study Torah all day long, you're allowed to. But the Gemara doesn't do that. Why? But based on this answer, we have the answer. Because they're not talking about the same thing. Rav Sheshes is talking about during translation, and this site is talking about during the actual reading. And if the Gemara doesn't have to follow its statement about not learning during Torah reading with any qualification from Rav Sheshes, because Rav Sheshes wasn't doing that. Following? The Shleimar says that Rashab might suggest that then the Shulchan Aruch might also agree with this understanding of the Gemara. Why? Because the Shulchan Aruch did the same thing. The Shulchan Aruch didn't say this is the halacha. You're not allowed to talk during Torah reading, and you're not even allowed to learn unless you are. Didn't say that. He just says yesh matirim, some permit. What do you mean some permit? Rav Sheshes is a some permit. Rav Sheshes is in the Gemara itself. It should have been a qualifier on the actual halacha. What do you mean yesh matirim? Those that permit. Now we have the answer. Because the Shulchan Aruch himself believes that Rav Sheshes did not talk and did not learn during Torah reading. So why does he quote yesh matirim that those that permit? Those that permit are the other people who understand Rav Sheshes differently. Following? Now, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't present Rav Sheshes' opinion fairly. Because however you understand Rav Sheshes' opinion, it shouldn't be some permit. It should be a qualifier that you're not allowed to learn unless in those X circumstance. That's not how the Shulchan Aruch phrases it. The Shulchan Aruch phrases it, you're not allowed to learn. Some allow. What do you mean some allow? The Gemara allows. What do you mean some allow? Now we have the answer. Because according to the Shulchan Aruch, the Gemara does not allow you to learn during Torah reading. It's only during the translation that you're allowed to. As for those that allow, those are the people that interpret the Gemara differently. Following?
Then you're allowed in between them.
Maybe. So the L'chura, so explain the Rashab. Now let's hear the Rashab explains what I just said. The L'chura in the movement, because it's seemingly not understood. Mashakos, that which the Shulchan Aruch writes, achakach, afterwards, after it says you're not allowed to learn during Torah reading, it says afterwards, Baloshin, using the language, yesh matirim, there are those that permit. What do you mean those that permit? According to all the opinions of however you, kol echad lefi pirush Rav Sheshes, however you want to explain Rav Sheshes' behavior, but all those explanations agree. No one says that Rav Sheshes and Rav Huna argue. That Rav Huna says you're not allowed to. All the answers that explain Rav Sheshes' behavior, none of them say it's machlokes. Rav Sheshes says you're allowed to learn. Rav Huna says you're not allowed to learn. They all give a qualifier. If so, then the Shulchan Aruch should have said so. You're not allowed to learn during Torah reading unless under X circumstance, because there is no argument in the Gemara. So why is the Shulchan Aruch presenting it as if it's an argument? So he should have said like this: Hani mili, when is it that you're not allowed to learn B'koil? If you're allowed, but if you're an undertone mutter, you're allowed to. But it doesn't say it that way. He says it as if it's two different opinions. When seemingly from the Gemara, and from all the explanations in the Gemara, there are no two different opinions. It's just a qualifier of when you have exemption, right? But the Shulchan Aruch doesn't give it as one opinion, because there's two opinions. As if to say, if you're now based in the above, the might say, the Mechaber, the Shulchan Aruch was not stressed by the contradiction of Rav Sheshes' behavior to Rav Huna's statement. Rav Huna said you're not allowed to talk even learning Torah during Torah, not during Torah reading. And Rav Sheshes, which spoke and learned during Torah reading, the Shulchan Aruch didn't see a contradiction there. Why? Because Rav Sheshes wasn't talking during Torah learning. He was learning. He wasn't talking during Torah reading. He was learning during the translation. And therefore, no contradiction. And therefore, Shulchan Aruch didn't even bring it up as an issue. Which is why all those who allow and say that Rav Sheshes is a qualifier, he didn't bring them as an actual qualifier. He brought them as a separate opinion. Because in his view, there is no qualification. You may not learn during Torah study, during Torah reading, period. Remember that Rabbi Bar Huna, and therefore the statement of Rabbi, son of Rav Huna, who said that you may not speak even in learning during Torah reading, he brings it as an unqualified statement. And if that's the case, even someone who has a deep desire for Torah learning, like Rav Sheshes, and he turns his face away even before Torah is open, even this is not allowed. That's right. But it's only in the Shulchan Aruch's view, based on the Rebbe Rashab's explanation, Rav Sheshes' behavior is only during the translation, not during the actual Torah reading. Now, all the above, where maybe you can find a way of understanding the Shulchan Aruch in such a manner that you may learn during Torah reading, because 10 people are there, because you happen to be Rav Sheshes, if you're confident enough that you're as desired in Torah study as Rav Sheshes, and you turned your face away before the Torah started, and there's 10 people sitting there listening anyway. And let's say you fulfilled your obligation earlier. But all that is l'daber b'divrei Torah. There's only a question of speaking in words of Torah, which anyways, as we just finished explaining, most likely, and the Rebbe Rashab's view is, even in Torah study, the Shulchan Aruch says you're not allowed to. But to speak during Torah study, during Torah reading, b'mili da'alma, in mundane matters, zevadai isir gomor lako. This is absolute prohibition for everybody. So up until this point, the Rebbe Rashab is going on the halachic angle. Now, to the end of the letter, it goes on the Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic understanding of what's happening at the moment of the Torah reading, and why proper attention is required. What time you say Ma'ariv is?
Starting 9 o'clock, 2 minutes to review.
Okay, so I'm going to stop over here because it's a good break. We learned the halacha, which is talking anything for sure not. And even in Torah study, the Rebbe Rashab understands the Shulchan Aruch to mean that you may not learn even during Torah learning, even though there are others that say you're allowed to. And next week, God willing, we're going to look at the Kabbalah of what's going on at the moment of Torah reading. And as we're going to learn, we're supposed to treat the Torah reading as if we're receiving the Torah at Sinai. That's how we ought to treat Torah reading. And that, God willing, coming next week is at the Shed on Thursday. Wonderful evening. Good Chodesh.